Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Javad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan and India have agreed to strictly observe all ceasefire agreements along the line of control and other sectors. Contacting on hotline, the Director Generals of Military Operations of both the countries also agreed to address core issues that might disturb peace. Pakistan military's media wing says the two military officials reviewed the situation along the LOC in a frank and cordial manner. Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has offered cooperation to Iraq in development and defense-related fields. He was speaking to the Iraqi Defense Minister, who called on him at the General Headquarters in Rawalpindi. The military's media wing said Army Chief acknowledged the sacrifices of the Iraqi nation in the war against terror. It added that the two sides vowed to work together for peace and stability in the region. In Armenia, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and thousands of his supporters rally in Yerevan after he accused the army of a coup attempt amid calls to step down. Rejecting calls for his resignation, the Prime Minister said only voters can decide his future. He's accused of poor handling of a 6-week conflict with Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh last year. Britain has announced further sanctions against Myanmar's military after it seized power in a coup at the start of this month. The Foreign Office said that Trade Ministry would work to ensure British businesses don't trade with the military-owned companies. Protests have taken place daily for about 3 weeks in Myanmar, calling for the release of elected leaders and for democracy to be restored. The researchers in the United States have found a new coronavirus variant in New York City. The U.S. death toll has jumped to over 505,000 with more than 28.3 million infections. Meanwhile, France has reported over 31,000 new cases, the biggest daily increase since mid-November. In Pakistan, over 1,300 people contracted the virus, while 64 died overnight, bringing the total to 12,762. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.5 million lives and infected over 112 million people. And in cricket, New Zealand restrict Australia to 215 runs to win their second T20 international by 4 runs in Dunedin. Martin Guptill was declared man of the match for scoring a quick knock of 97 runs. Those were the headlines and detailed stories. Right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan and India have agreed to strictly observe all ceasefire agreements along the line of control and other sectors since midnight. This was agreed between the Director Generals of Military Operations of both the countries during discussions over the established hotline. Pakistan military's media wing says the two military officials reviewed the situation along the LOC in a frank and cordial manner. They agreed to address core issues that might disturb peace and lead to violence. ISPR added both the sides reiterated that established mechanisms of hotline contact and border flag meetings must be used. They vowed to resolve any unseen situation or misunderstanding. India has committed more than 13,000 ceasefire violations since 2003 and 253 this year. And for more on this, we are joined by Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, retired from Islamabad. So thank you for your time at Indus News. Pakistan and India have agreed to strictly observe all ceasefire agreements along the LOC and other sectors. How important this agreement is for the peace in the region?
I think this is very significant, very important, but unfortunately, we have not been following it. Indians have not been implementing. This understanding was already there right from 2000 onward, and we observed complete peace on the LOC till about 2013. But then I think from 2014 onward, when we had change of government in India and Modi came into power, then there was rampant violations of the LOC on one pretext or the other. And at the same time, the mechanism which was there to implement or to investigate all such incidents of violation, that was also violated by the Indians. We have the United Nations Observer Group on both sides of the LOC, but Indians do not allow them to come onto the LOC, and they stay in Srinagar. So even today, when we have agreed to observe ceasefire on the LOC, it is very important that these observers, they are given a chance, they are allowed to visit the LOC whenever there is any violation, because until and unless you investigate and put the blame on someone for the violation, it will continue. So one has to really keep the fingers crossed till we really see the strict implementation, although we have been able to revive the understanding.
So India's ceasefire violations along the LOC have reached a new high in the last few years. Will New Delhi abide by this latest agreement?
See, the agreement which was concluded, it is in fact an understanding which was there from 2003 onward. And we had a feeling that it was, I mean, in a gentleman's way, this was being implemented. And we expect that this will now be implemented, although the mechanism has been disturbed. The reason that I have a belief that they will implement this thing, because India has a lot of internal problems. They also have a lot of disturbance in Kashmir, that farmers, that protest is going on, and then they also have a confrontation on the Chinese border. So India is facing a lot many difficulties internally and externally, and perhaps they thought that this is the time that they should at least keep the LOC quiet. But I think it is in our interest, because we have our civilians along the LOC, and they have been suffering in a big way. There have been casualties, and there have been, I mean, they have not been able to go to their lands even at places where the lands were threatened. So the life, I think, along the LOC will become a bit normal for the people on both sides.
General Amjad Shoaib, sir, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And to talk more about this, we are joined by Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, retired from Islamabad. So thank you for your time at Indus News as well. Pakistan and India have agreed on strict observance of all the agreements, understandings and ceasefire along the line of control and all other sectors. How do you see this development?
I think whichever side has taken the initiative, they have done a great thing. And especially once they have agreed to talk on the core issues of the only thing is, of course, the high-level interaction will only be possible if it goes right up to political level, which I think this contact will make a base for further talks as far as military-to-military talks are concerned, as far as government-to-government talks are concerned, and especially if they have also mentioned talking on the core issues, that is a great news. And for the time being, I would say that it is also a very good omen for all the civilians living along the line of control, because if you stop all these ceasefire violations, life will be much easier for them.
So, sir, will this development help thaw in ties between both the countries?
You know, for a very long time, there was no talk going on. The communication was blocked. The governments were not talking, the militaries were not talking, the people were not allowed to really talk to each other. So once this thaw has taken place, it should be taken as a base for people-to-people contact, for government-to-government contact, for military-to-military contact. And I think this will go a long way in creating an environment in this region whereby we can talk to each other and resolve our issues. Because I always say that we are quite good in intellect as far as people of this region are concerned. Don't believe that if we sit down, we will not be able to resolve our issues. We can always do that. The only precondition is that the mistrust must be removed. Finger pointing at each other must not happen. And the talk must start. Because once we start talking, then the doors keep on opening for further progress. That is what we expect.
General Naeem Khalid Lodi, sir, thank you for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now, moving on, Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has offered cooperation to Iraq in development and defense-related fields. He was speaking to the Iraqi Defense Minister, who called on him at the General Headquarters in Rawalpindi. The military's media wing said Army Chief acknowledged the sacrifices of the Iraqi nation in the war against terrorism, while the Iraqi Defense Minister appreciated Pakistan's efforts for regional peace. It added that the two sides vowed to work together for stability in the region. Pakistan says a third state is sponsoring cross-border attacks from the territory of a neighboring country. Ambassador Munir Akram was speaking at the United Nations Security Council's ARIA Formula meeting. Akram said Islamabad respects the sovereignty of its neighboring states, but has the right to defend itself against state-sponsored terrorism. He said the fight against terror has been utilized to justify the use of force and foreign intervention. Akram further said India's illegal military occupation of Kashmir was among the worst violations of the UN Charter. The envoy said that the Kashmiri struggle for the right to self-determination cannot be equated with terrorism. He said India was threatening to use force against Pakistan to divert attention from state-sponsored terrorism in occupied Kashmir. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has called for a global action to put an end to illicit flow of money from developing countries to tax havens. Addressing a panel on global financial accountability, Khan said the illicit flow of money is the principal cause of poverty in developing countries. Khan said efforts should be made to ensure the return of stolen assets. The Prime Minister called for legislation on anti-money laundering to stem the illicit flow of money. In Armenia, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and thousands of supporters rally in Yerevan after he accused the military of a coup attempt amid calls to step down. He has rejected calls for his resignation, saying only voters can decide his future. Though the Prime Minister has fired the army chief, the military still maintains the demand for his resignation. Thousands staged a rival protest in the capital, accused the Prime Minister of poor handling of a 6-week conflict with Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh last year. Turkey and Russia have called for calm, while Moscow urging the army and Pashinyan to resolve their differences peacefully. Britain has announced further sanctions against Myanmar's military after it seized power in a coup at the start of this month. In a statement, the Foreign Office said it will sanction 6 more military figures, adding to 19 previously listed. It said the Trade Ministry will work to ensure British businesses do not trade with Myanmar's military-owned companies. Last week, Britain and Canada imposed sanctions on 3 army officials, including the Ministers of Defence and Home Affairs. Protests have taken place daily for about 3 weeks in Myanmar, calling for the release of elected leaders and for the democracy to be restored. At least 41 migrants have drowned in the central Mediterranean Sea after their boat capsized. In a joint statement, the UN's Human Rights and Migrants Agency said the dinghy had 120 people on board. They said missing migrants also include 3 children and 4 women. The agency said the shipwreck demonstrates the urgent need to strengthen Europe's search and rescue system. The statement read, saving the lives of migrants in distress must become a priority for the international community. It added some 160 persons have died in the central Mediterranean so far this year. Since 2014, more than 20,000 refugees have died at sea while trying to reach Europe from Africa. The US says its patience with Iran on returning to discussions of the 2015 nuclear deal is not unlimited. At a news briefing, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said Tehran's moves away from the compliance with the deal made the issue an urgent challenge for Washington. Price said the most effective way to ensure Iran could never acquire a nuclear weapon is through diplomacy. Iran has not formally responded to a U.S. offer for a joint meeting with the signatories last week. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The researchers in the United States have found a new coronavirus variant in New York City. The U.S. death toll has jumped to over 505,000 with more than 28.3 million infections. Globally, the virus has claimed 2.5 million lives and infected over 112 million people. More in this report.
Although the US and most South American states saw a 30% decline in new cases and deaths in the last week, infections could spike again due to new variants. Pan American Health Organization says vaccines are in short supply and it will be months before inoculations affect the rate of cases. The researchers say the new virus variant is spreading rapidly in New York City and it carries a mutation that may weaken the effectiveness of vaccines. Moderna says it is working with US government scientists to study an experimental booster shot that targets a concerning new variant. Meanwhile, Johnson & Johnson's one-shot vaccine also appeared safe and effective in trials, paving the way for its approval for emergency use.
I think this news from the Food and Drug Administration is very encouraging. We know that we need to get more people vaccinated, especially when there's a variant around. Because remember, viruses can't mutate if they can't survive. So the more people we get vaccinated, the better. And to have another vaccine available, and I expect it'll be authorized this weekend, is really going to help in terms of getting as many people vaccinated in as short as time as possible. So it's very good news.
In Europe, France reported over 31,000 new cases, the biggest daily increase since mid-November. Paris has also announced a weekend lockdown in the Dunkirk area while keeping other areas under watch in array of light amid grim news. A study in UK showed strong antibody responses in people who have received 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. The European Union's vaccine rollout continues to stutter due to delivery delays, limiting the bloc to only a fraction of its planned inoculations. Meanwhile, unlike its previous approach, the Swedish government announced to step up its restrictions in a bid to avoid third wave.
The situation in Sweden is serious. We have a high spread of infection and it is continuing to increase. The mutations mean that this situation is even more worrying. There is a big risk of a third wave. This is not predetermined, but it is your and our collective behavior that determines whether that will be the case.
South Korea distributed the AstraZeneca vaccines to hospitals and public health centers across the country as it kicks off its mass inoculation drive.
Pakistan has reported 64 deaths from COVID-19 overnight. The health ministry says the fatalities toll has risen to 12,772. It's 1,361 more people contracted the virus in the last 24 hours. Out of nearly 576,000 infected in the country, nearly 540,000 have recovered. However, there still are more than 23,000 active cases in Pakistan. The ministry said just over 2,000 patients are admitted to hospitals across the country. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders has lashed out at Israel for donating surplus coronavirus vaccines to foreign allies while depriving Palestinians. Earlier, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Tel Aviv is sending out spare vaccines. In a tweet, Sanders said Israel is responsible for the health of Palestinians as an occupying power. He termed Netanyahu's decision as outrageous. The senator added, many Palestinians in the occupied territories are still waiting for the vaccination. President Joe Biden has revoked his predecessor's order that blocked many green card applicants from entering the U.S. Donald Trump had issued the ban last year, saying it was needed to protect U.S. workers amid high unemployment. In a statement, the White House said Biden overturned the measure through an executive order. It said the ban does not advance the interests of the U.S. The statement read, the Trump order also prevented people from joining their families in the U.S. However, Biden has left in place another ban on most foreign temporary workers. The UN has expressed concerns over the recent clashes in Somalia's capital Mogadishu. In a statement, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said political tension in Somalia will affect people's livelihoods. It added that aid groups fear that armed clashes will aggravate the dire humanitarian crisis in the country. The UN has urged all the political parties to ensure the safety of civilians. Tensions rose after the Somali president's constitutional mandate expired this month, with the opposition calling for anti-government protests. In Niger, supporters of Mohamed Ousmane took to the streets in Niamey to protest the presidential election results. Demonstrators burned tires and set several buildings on fire in a third day of violent protests. Ruling party candidate Mohamed Bazoum was the winner of Sunday's runoff election with over 55% of the votes. But his rival Ousmane has alleged fraud and claimed he won with over 50% of the vote. Small groups of Ousmane supporters clashed with police and troops who responded by firing tear gas. Earlier, an observer mission from the Economic Community of West African States said the vote was held under free and fair conditions. Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez says U.S. allegations of his ties with cartels could affect cooperation in fighting drug trafficking. This comes after U.S. prosecutors accused Hernandez of protecting traffickers in order to assert his power in the country. They accused him of accepting $1 million bribe from Mexican drug lord Joaquim El Chapo Guzman. But the Honduran president, who is a key U.S. ally in Central America, has denied the allegations. Hernandez said the Los Cuchillos cartel falsely accused him in an effort to seek shorter prison sentences. Addressing the Honduran Congress, he warned U.S. officials that allegations could compromise joint security efforts.
If certain offices in the United States make the mistake of rewarding drug traffickers who give false testimony instead of increasing their penalties, if that error happens, then the battle that we have jointly waged with our allies against drug trafficking may become unsustainable.
In Ecuador, the death toll from riots between rival gangs in 4 prisons has risen to 79, while Ecuador's national police says a new mutiny in Guayaquil prison is underway. In a tweet, the official said police are preparing to enter again with necessary rational force. Confirming the new riots, the prison authorities said its agents are coordinating with Ecuador's national police. Yesterday, the riots broke out in prisons in Guayaquil, Cuenca and Latacunga cities simultaneously. Earlier, the government said the order was restored while some police officers were also wounded during the riots. President Lenin Moreno has declared a temporary state of emergency in prisons across the Andean country. The Australian Parliament has passed the final amendments to a media law that forces tech giants to pay for the news content. Tweaks to the law were made after Facebook blocked access to Australian news outlets on its pages. The law incentivizes tech giants and news organizations to negotiate payment deals. In a joint statement, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg and Communications Minister Paul Fletcher said the code will ensure that news businesses are fairly paid for the content they generate. They added it will also help sustain public interest journalism in Australia. Australia is the first country where a government arbitrator will decide the price to be paid by the tech giants if talks fail. In India, the right-wing BJP government is tightening the lid on freedom of expression further through more stringent censorship of social media. A draft regulation by New Delhi plans to push social media firms to immediately erase content on government's orders and assist investigations. The proposed rules are widely seen as a reaction to a face-off between Modi and Twitter over content related to farmers' protests in India. Facebook and Twitter have declined requests to comment on the new regulations. India's opposition Congress says the Modi government has turned India into internet shutdown capital of the world. In Indonesia, 3 people have died after a landslide hit an illegal gold mining area in central Sulawesi province. The provincial disaster management officials say more people are feared dead as 5 are still missing. In a statement, they said rescue teams are deployed at the site with heavy machinery to help the search. The officials added so far 15 survivors have been rescued. The landslide in the village of Buranga occurred after days of heavy rain. Whale watchers in the U.S. state of California got up close and personal with a huge humpback whale. It was filmed on camera mugging boats off the coast of Newport Beach. Mugging refers to when a whale swims close to a boat and stays close while interacting with those on the boat. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says humpback whales can grow up to 60 feet and 40 tons. They can live about 80 to 90 years. Despite their huge size, humpback whales are considered as one of the gentlest animals in the world. Pakistan is home to nearly 3 million Afghan refugees who have built their homes and businesses in the country over the past few decades. Though thousands have been repatriated back to Afghanistan, Pakistan continues to host a sizable refugee population. This report by our correspondent Manahil Ahmed has more.
The story of refugees is one of resilience, perseverance, and courage. One such story involves Salim Hashimi, who came to Pakistan as a refugee during the Soviet-Afghan War. Hailing from the city of Jalrez in Maidan Wardak province, Hashimi opened his own restaurant 2 years ago in Islamabad.
People visit Islamabad from all over the world. Due to the diversity of the city, I knew that people would be accepting to different flavors in cuisine.
Muhammad Ahmed is another Afghan refugee who is a proud owner of a French fries cart in the capital's Jinnah supermarket. Originally from Mazar Sharif, Amir considers Pakistan his home and says the country has given him multiple opportunities.
I was born and raised in Pakistan as a second-generation refugee. The government of Pakistan has granted us with all sorts of facilities.
Despite the huge financial challenges, Pakistan has given its guests access to health and education services. As the prospect of peace in Afghanistan improves, the focus could indeed turn to how to bring about the orderly return of refugees after years of insecurity. Manahil Ahmed, Indus News, Islamabad.
In Colombia, a man's search for his missing brother ends in joy after 32 years of separation. More about their rare reunion in this report.
3-year-old Jonathan was playing with his brother Alfonso in their garden in western Bogota on 25th of September 1987 when a family friend approached, inviting him to buy candy. Jonathan went with the man, vanishing without a trace for 32 years. Older brother Juan Jimenez, then 5, was looking out the window when the man took his brother. Jimenez grew up with his mother and has grief over her son's disappearance. Yuan vowed to find his brother.
I guess it was a promise. I grew up showing mommy suffering so much, so I always wanted to give her like happiness, to do something for her, like to see your mom suffering in such a way. I guess that was my big desire, to try to do something, and in this situation, to find my brother, to be able to find my brother.
Then a DNA company called MyHeritage donated a test in the hope he could match with Jonathan that way. It worked. In 2019, Juan got a message from a 34-year-old lawyer in Norway who said he had been adopted at age 4 and was trying to find his biological family. Juan went to Norway in January 2020 to meet Jonathan, now John.
It was hard for me going through all my childhood not knowing about my biological family. But now we are together and we have to live in the present, because we can't do anything about the past. We can do something about the future, and now we are creating a future. We can never get back the 32 years that we missed, but we can make the next 32 the most amazing ones in our lives.
Trapped in Colombia by a coronavirus lockdown on a visit last year, Jonathan studied Spanish and celebrated 32 birthdays without his family.
Iconic cartoon characters Tom and Jerry are returning to screens, but this time they're entering the real world. In the new movie, the pair take their competitive antics to a posh hotel in New York. More in this report.
Tom and Jerry were created back in 1940. The cartoons have had continued success over 8 decades, seemingly never putting a foot or paw wrong with audiences. Their comedic, slapstick violence returns at the scene of the biggest celebrity wedding of the decade. In the film, chaos ensues, and it's up to a hotel employee to try and curb the pair's long-standing behavioral problems.
It really does harken back to the Tom and Jerry that we love. It's 2D animation with little elements of 3D, but it's predominantly 2D animation, which I think, as a fan, was a really big deal for me. And then as well as that, they don't shy away from them bonking each other on the head and dropping the weights on each other and really going at each other.
Comedian Colin Jost plays one half of the celebrity couple in the movie. He feels the time is right for the warring couple to return to our screens during a pandemic.
It's such a pure, goofy comedy right now. To see that kind of physical comedy, especially from cartoon characters, that I think it's a huge relief right now. I mean, to have the fact that they don't talk and they just take out all their feelings with violence, I think is very refreshing to see right now, and people can let out a lot of their frustrations through these characters.
Yes! Filming the comedy was a surreal experience for the actors. Often, they did not have a script, and they also had to deal with a lot of cat and mouse stand-ins.
Oh my gosh!
Designer Kim Jones has made his ready-to-wear debut at Rome-based Fendi at Milan Fashion Week. He presented a neutral-toned autumn-winter line. More in this report.
Following in the footsteps of late designer Karl Lagerfeld, who collaborated with Fendi for 54 years, Kim Jones opened the presentation with a fur coat, a brand staple. Coats, cropped knit tops, high-waisted trousers, and pinstripe silk shirt dresses followed. Models wore utilitarian jackets, marbled silk or draped dresses, and fringed scarves in pale pink, white, mink, grey, and black. Jones nodded to past creations of the Fendi family, who founded the brand in 1925, and Lagerfeld. Milan Fashion Week runs until 1st of March, with brands such as Armani, Prada, and Valentino sharing their collections videos on a digital platform instead of hosting live shows because of COVID-19 restrictions.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. And now the business updates. Wall Street's main indices open lower as technology-related stocks remain under pressure with a rise in treasury yields. This comes as data showed weekly jobless claims fell more than expected. The Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 are trading marginally lower. The Nasdaq Composite is also trading lower by a fraction. Meanwhile, oil prices fell slightly but hovered around their highest levels in over 13 months. It was supported by a sharp drop in crude output last week due to the storm in Texas. US President Joe Biden has signed an executive order aimed at addressing a global semiconductor chip shortage. The dearth has forced US automakers and other manufacturers to cut production. Talking to reporters, Biden said Americans should never face shortages in the goods and services they rely on. Biden said he will seek $37 billion in funding for legislation to supercharge chip manufacturing in the U.S.
Second, this order initiates a long-term review of the industry bases of 6 sectors of our overall economy over the next year. These reviews will identify policy recommendations to fortify our supply chains at every step, and critically to start implementing those recommendations right away.
And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.